Hi, so today what we're doing is making ravioli, and we're going to stuff that ravioli with butternut squash. Delicious, healthy, and it makes for a great meal. So the first thing that we need to do is take care of our butternut squash. So what you do is cut off the top, cut it in half, and I'll just do one half right now and do the other half off camera. So we have the beautiful orange for the butternut squash, and then we need to get rid of the peel. So the way you do that, just have it standing nice and solid on your cutting board, and then you follow the shape while using your sharp knife, not pushing too hard, just going all the way around. And now that you have that first layer off, all you have to do is with the right side of your blade, follow that white line right there. So that white line that you see right here, you follow that with the back of your knife, and that will then make sure that every next cut takes all the skin off. So what we're doing with the butternut squash today is we're going to roast it. That brings out a really nice flavor, and then we're going to puree it. So the first thing we need to do is cut it into smaller pieces. Put them in a bowl, add salt, pepper, a little bit of sugar, and a little honey. That adds again to the sweetness to it. It also helps it to caramelize a little bit better, and the caramelization adds then a really nice flavor. So then what we do is we put it in the oven, we roast it until it has a nice color and the butternut squash itself is soft, and then we puree it, and then we make sure that we taste it, that it has the right flavor. And then when it's completely cooled down, then we can put it inside our pasta and make our ravioli, okay? So it's all peeled right now. All we have to do now is just cut it into pieces. I like to cut it into wedges. That makes it a little easier to handle. And put that in, there. And then we do the same thing with the bottom half. Now the bottom half, of course, has some seeds in it, which we will encounter once we cut it in half. And cut in half. And then you see that sometimes there is a lot of seeds. So we just remove the seeds. You do not have to remove all that pulp. That pulp actually caramelizes really nice and adds a nice flavor. I do the same thing with pumpkins when I make a pumpkin pie or a pumpkin cake. Of course, and what you do at this time, before you get started even, you get your oven already preheated, so you don't have to wait for that to heat up once you have everything seasoned. All right, then you spread them out so everything is exposed. That helps with the seasoning. You always want to make sure that you season everything evenly. And then we take our kosher salt. And just a light sprinkle of salt everywhere. Then we take our white pepper, sprinkle of sugar. You don't want to make it too sweet, obviously, but this is more for the caramelization. And then your honey. Also not too much, just to add that nice flavor to it. Okay, and then finally some extra virgin olive oil. You can also use a basil infused olive oil. That adds a nice flavor to it. Or you can even use a walnut oil if you like. Okay, so now we just coat this. Make sure that everything gets seasoned evenly. You want to put a little cooking spray on your sheet so it doesn't stick afterwards. I like to lay it down so there's an even space between everything, so it colors and cooks a lot better than just being piled on top of each other. And then this goes into the oven, 425 degrees. If you have a roast setting on your oven and a convection setting, I'd recommend using that, because the more it roasts, the more it caramelizes and the more the flavor develops. Use a spatula to get the last of the oil out of the pan. And then she goes into the oven. Usually it takes about 15 minutes. So after 15 minutes, give it a look. If you decide it needs a little bit longer, let it go. If it's ready, take it out and then just let it cool down before we go on with the next step. So while the squash is in the oven, we're going to work on our pasta dough, because that has to rest also after we're done making it. I'm using a half and half, but you can also use just all-purpose flour with the exact same recipe. But I'm using half all-purpose flour and half semolina flour. 4 whole eggs, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. So let's put the salt in the bowl. Then we add our tablespoon of olive oil. There we go. And then we add our 4 eggs. We also want to sift our flour. So we add the semolina to a strainer, all purpose on top. Then you can use a whisk. Gonna mix that up, and at the same time you're sifting it. Make a little well in the middle. There we go. Then we take our egg, salt, and oil mixture, and we pour that in the well, and then whisk with our fork. And while we're doing that, you scrape a little bit of the flour into your egg mixture. And then it slowly starts to thicken up. And then you just keep on stirring. Now you can start shaking the bowl around a little bit to add more flour to the middle. And then you see it starts to come together more and more and more. That it looks for a little bit like you might have too much flour versus the amount of liquid that you have. But you'll see soon enough that once you start putting some pressure on that and bring it together with your hand, that it's actually the perfect measurement. You just bring the egg and the flour all together. Add some pressure with your fist while flipping the dough around. So then I'll just keep on kneading this until we have a really nice smooth dough. Usually takes about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how often you have kneaded dough before. You get a little quicker at it after a while. I just make it flat, and then I set it on its side, and then make it flat again. And that massages it really nicely for you. And then you start feeling, you can also see it, it's all one color now. But you also feel it, that it gets nice and soft. There. Beautiful, soft, stretchy dough. Now we're just gonna let this rest for about 30 minutes to an hour. And then we're ready to roll out our pasta sheets, okay? There we go. Okay, the oven is ready. That means that the squash is ready. All right, so here we have our squash, nicely sizzling. We have a little bit of browning on the edges. That's exactly what we want, so we get that caramelized flavor. So now what we can do is we can put it in our food processor to turn it into a puree. Just gently. Now, if you're using aluminum foil, of course, what you can also do is just grab the aluminum foil, which will not be hot. Pick it up, and then add that to your food processor like this. You don't have to burn your hands. And then now we can just pulse it until it's pureed. And scrape it down a little bit, chop it up into smaller pieces. Help the machine along a little bit. So it's almost there. Just have a couple of pieces left. So this is actually a good time to taste it to make sure that it has the right flavor. At this time we can add some more salt and pepper to it, and then while it's grinding, it's mixing it up so you get a nice even flavor all throughout. Now this is hot, so please be careful. It doesn't need anything, it's spot on. So then we have our puree ready. Then we transfer it to a bowl, there. And we spread it around, kind of make it a thin layer. Again, that will help the cooling down process, make it go a little quicker. And we can just let this sit. If you have space in your refrigerator, you could place this in your refrigerator, and that makes it go even quicker. So we just set this aside, do the dishes in the meantime. Okay, so now the puree is cooled down, the dough is rested, so now it's time to assemble the ravioli. I like to use a piping bag for this particular filling. It just makes it a whole lot easier. If you don't have a piping bag, you can also use a zipped up bag, or you can just do it with a spoon. So then we have our dough. We're gonna cut the dough in 4 equal pieces and then do 1 piece at a time. The other pieces, make sure that you wrap them up so they don't dry out. And then this piece right here, we need to make that square. So flatten it out, push the sides in, and turn it into a square or a rectangle. So what you want to do is you want to flatten it already, kind of helping it along. There, so we have a little bit of a rectangle shape here. And then we're going to put that through our machine. We're going to number 2 or number 3. Depending on the machine, you might have a machine that goes the other way around, so then you want to go to number 6 or maybe number 5. It's also a personal preference on how thick you want it. So this, we use a little bit of flour to lubricate, prevent the dough from sticking to our machine. There we go. And then your first swing, of course, goes nice and slow, because it has to go from that pretty thick dough to the thin dough. There we go. And then we run it through a second time, just to set the thickness. Number 6, I start to feel a little tackiness. So that is then the time to add a little bit more flour on the outside. And it will also make it easier later on when you're making it into ravioli, to prevent it from sticking to your workbench, etc. There we are. And this is the thickness that we wanted at. We fold the dough in half. There. And now we can add our filling. And this is another reason why we have our filling nice and cold, because if your filling is warm, it's also a lot more runny and makes it a lot harder to work with. There we are. Now, of course, we need to glue those doughs together, so we need a little bit of water. You don't want to make it too wet, just enough to make it moist. And wherever there's no filling, that's where you add some moisture. And then gently use your hand kind of in between there so it doesn't fall down. And then we just lay that gently on top. And then get your fingers underneath, press out the air, and stick the dough together. See, my finger is always underneath here, so I can move over to the next section of filling. On the other side, we do the same thing, but of course we have our thumbs underneath. Do the edges. And then we get our ravioli cutter. There we go. So the first thing we do is we go through the middle, down the middle. And then we do the first edge here. And then we do the long edge here. Same thing on the other side. And then now we can cut our ravioli out. So I have a cookie sheet that I covered in flour so that our ravioli won't stick. Gently pick it up, push all the air out, closing it up. And there we go. So the reason that you want all the air out is so that when you cook them, your ravioli don't float. They will not necessarily sink all the way to the bottom, but you don't want them to be floating on top because then they won't cook evenly. And these cook really, really quick. They take about 2 to 3 minutes in boiling salted water to finish off. And then of course we can mix them with a nice sauce. Now let's say that you make a whole bunch of them. You say, well, that's way too much for me to use all in one sitting. What do I do with all the extra ravioli? Well, you can freeze them very easily, but you freeze them as they are right now. On a cookie sheet, spread out, stick that in your freezer, and then when they're completely frozen, then you can take them off the cookie sheet, put them in a Ziploc bag, and put them back in the freezer. Then when you cook them from the frozen state. So you do not want them defrosting first and then try to put them to the water. It will become a giant mess. They will just all glue together, and you don't want that to happen. So you freeze them, put them in a Ziploc bag, back into the freezer, and then when you're ready to cook them next time, straight from the freezer into the boiling water, and your ravioli are done. And that's how you make ravioli. So now we're ready to make our sauce for our ravioli. And the reason I like to use this sauce, it's mostly olive oil with scallions and garlic. And you can really taste the ravioli itself. Since we're putting good quality product inside the ravioli, there's no need to cover it up with some really strong sauce. So we add our scallions to the pan. And you probably noticed that my oil is not hot. We want that. We don't want the oil to be hot before we put our items in. We're not going to color them, we're going to sweat them. We just want the flavor of the scallions and the garlic to permeate through the olive oil, which then is going to coat the ravioli and give it that really nice extra little taste. Now we see that this is starting to bubble, really almost getting to a saute level. So then we want to cool it down. So we add a little bit more cool oil to it, take it off the heat, and then our sauce is already done. It goes pretty quick. Our water is already boiling over here on the other side. I'll bring it there. I like to use a flat pan. It makes it easy to have the ravioli all by themselves cooking in that pan. Now this is going to take about 2 to 3 minutes. It's fresh pasta, so that always cooks a lot faster than pasta that was dried and store-bought. And like I said earlier, when you cook it directly from the freezer, then of course you want to add at least 1 minute to it because you have to still defrost it. I have about 1 portion in here. You see that the water stops boiling right now. That is always a good indicator that you need to stop. You don't want to overwhelm the water. Now there's enough space for those ravioli to kind of hover around in the pan. And that's my honey right there who's sticking her hands in. She's taking pictures. Come on in, honey. Take pictures. We need pictures for Instagram, right? By the way, I have an account on Instagram, Chef Marcel Cooks. Hit some likes on there. Appreciate it. You know, make the channel grow, it makes everything grow, and I can just keep on producing more of these recipes. So how do you know when it's ready? Well, what you do is you take one of the ravioli out, and I'll show you that in just a second, and I'm gonna pinch it, and then I'm gonna feel the texture of it. You want it al dente. The funny thing about fresh pasta is it starts off really, really soft, and as we're cooking it, it gets harder and harder. So you don't want to overcook this. So after about 2 to 3 minutes, what you do is you take your slotted spoon and you fish one out, and then with your nail, you pinch that little bit of dough right here on the side. There. And if you feel that that is real tender still, you probably need another 30 seconds to a minute until it becomes a little firmer. It becomes al dente. Now, if you were to have ground beef in here, then of course you need to make sure that it's cooked all the way to 155 degrees internal temperature, because you want to make sure that the germs that live in that beef are cooked all the way. All right, so let's grab another one. Beautiful. This is al dente. So it was another, what, 45 seconds or so So now what we do is we take it directly from the water and put it in our pan. You don't want to drain it too much. You want some of that boiling, that cooking water that has the salt in it to go into your oil, into your sauce. And then you're going to coat that with all that delicious flavor. And at the same time, you're going to cook your next batch of ravioli. So you see this gets all nice and coated with that oil. So that flavor is really everywhere. As you can tell, the water is already all gone. It's a very simple dish to look at, but it has so many different flavors that I know you will enjoy it. All right, then you want to make sure your plates are nice and warm, so that when you put the food on, especially in an air-conditioned environment, that your food doesn't get cold the moment it touches the plate. Just about 20 seconds in the oven is all it takes for them to warm up. Now, of course, you can add some nice cheese to this. You can add some Parmigiano Reggiano, or you can add some Pecorino Romano. That's all personal preference. A nice amount of oil on there. So there we have our plates, nice, ready. 2 just with scallions and garlic, 1 with the sage sauce, a little bit of Parmigiano Reggiano, and we're gonna drink a little Pinot Grigio with it. It's Friuli Grave. Oh, that's nice and crisp, very nice. That's gonna be perfect with this dish. Nice and fruity, good for a hot summer day or a nice day like today. It's pretty good any day. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you click that like button, do the subscribe and the little bell so you get notified when we upload a new video. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next one. Salut, bon appétit.